Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the viewing rim of the transport kindness of strangers and watched Concordia's spire unfurl across the starfield like a silver helix. The station's petals rotated with botanical grace, each petal a habitat for a different species. It was the sort of architecture people drew on school notebooks when they still believed peace could be sketched into existence. Earth's feeds called today the most important day since the first radio wave left our atmosphere. Elena had read the intercepted traffic 2 nights ago and stopped believing in notebooks. On the bulkhead behind her, a thin strip of tape held a 6-word reminder she'd brought from home: peace between equals or not at all. Her grandmother had said it first, then Madison in other terms, then every negotiator who'd survived their first lie. Elena smoothed the tape with her thumb and turned at the soft chime of the intercom. "Docking in 18, said Captain O'Neill from the cockpit. "Final brief." She crossed the narrow corridor to the mess, which they'd turned into a quiet room because quiet rooms were what diplomats asked for before ceremonies. 22 people sat there in variations of blue and gray: scholars, archivists, cultural attachés. To anyone scanning, they were exactly what they seemed. That was the plan. At the far end, Security Chief Noah Reyes stood like a statue beside a rack of polished walking sticks meant as gifts. He could make a stick look like a sermon. Elena tapped the table. "You've all seen the intercepts. The Synarch have labeled humanity unbounded risk. The Luminari think we treat entropy like a sport. The Celt Dominion still believes glory requires someone else's funeral. The Treaty of Concordia is a public stage. Backstage is a firing squad." "Doctor," Amara Lee pushed her glasses up and let them settle exactly where they always did when she was hiding a grin. "We came anyway. We came because we won't let 3 powers write a definition of civilized that means obedient," Kira Patel said, arranging a tray of woven textiles from Oaxaca, Kashmir, and the Niger Delta. She'd stitched thin threads of memory metal through the patterns. Art could be armor when you wove it correctly. Reyes lifted one of the walking sticks. "They'll scan these and find wood, lacquer, and a history lesson. And because that's what they are meant to find," Elena said. "Rule 1, never lie to a machine. Tell it a truth it can't use." They moved through the checks without theater. The translator brooches Kira handed out contained no radios at all. They read air, not signals. Minute phase changes in molecules, the way a flute reads breath. Amara's glasses carried no silicon. Their lenses were layered crystals ground to ridiculous tolerances, able to bend light into algebra. Reyes's ceremonial sash was just silk, until you aligned the embroidery's golden spirals with the station's rotational frequency. Then silk became counterspin. On paper, they were underarmed and overdressed. Under paper, they were something no intercept had ever warned the powers about, a species that treated constraints like invitations. In The Federalist, Hamilton had written that men were not angels. In the long centuries since, human engineers had discovered angels were just structures pretending to be inevitable. O'Neill's voice again. "Approach vector locked. Their protocol wants our feeds open and our weapons reporting." "We have neither," Amara said cheerfully. Elena breathed in and let the breath go. "Remember the moral frame. We aren't here to humiliate anyone. If we can walk out with their trust intact, we do. If we can't, we make sure the next meeting is on equal ground." Concordia Spire swallowed them with the grace of a cathedral. The docking collar kissed hull. Atmosphere readouts ticked green. When the hatch cycled, light poured in soft gold, warm as a choir. 3 delegations stood in the arc beyond the airlock. Luminary emissaries shimmered in bipedal geometry, bodies of slow light refracted through crystal lattices. Their leader's name bloomed across a display in tones, not words: Prism Speaker Ilex. The Synarch delegation arrived as a synchronized chord of Mercury bodies, minds braided into something like consensus. Unit Prime 4 addressed them without moving lips. The Celt arrived last, tall and ash-skinned in uniforms that remembered every battle they had ever won. General Torvak did not smile. He looked at humans the way ancient maps looked at dragons. "Welcome," said Ilex in a voice that sounded like a sunrise seen through glass. "May beings of reason bind the wound of history." Elena bowed with a precision that would insult no one and flatter no one. "Earth is honored," she said, careful with the word honored. "We've come to write a piece worthy of the word." Ceremony carried them along braided corridors painted in colors chosen to please average eyes. That was the first tell. No one designs a neutral space that aggressively. The second tell was the guard distribution. Too many, too still, sight lines tightened toward the heart instead of the exits. The third tell was silence, real silence, the sound a place makes when its comms are listening harder than its people. Amara asked childlike questions about bioadaptive lighting while her glasses counted resonances in the floor. Reyes walked 3 paces behind Elena, seeing door hinges and bolt heads where other people saw art. Kira's laughter mapped status by who looked at whom before they answered. Elena kept the conversation inside the rails the powers had laid and planted seeds in the seams, sketches of cooperation that didn't require permission. The chamber for the signing was circular and proud of it. Holos painted a quiet galaxy across the dome. The treaty itself sat on a table in a silvered script designed to charm every alphabet present. Placards indicated seats. Humanities were at the exact center. Ilex raised a prismatic hand, lights dimmed by half. Before signatures bind, a formality, weapons surrender. A pause long enough to be polite, short enough to be a command. Reyes lifted his empty palms. Only symbols, general. Stories carry sharper edges than steel. Your species proves that, Torvak said, and the room's temperature fell an honest degree. Unit Prime 4's voice arrived from every surface. Sensors detect hazard potentials. Please comply. Doors sealed with a sigh. Gravity deepened like a kneeling. The air found a thin, bitter note. Elena let one heartbeat pass, then another. She looked down at the tape on her wrist, the 6 words that had outlived wars. When she looked up, her smile belonged to a surgeon holding a scalpel. "Of course," she said. "Let us begin the formality." Somewhere deep in Concordia Spire, something small that had never been a weapon decided the room was ready for truth. They turned the galaxy red with one command. Ceremonial white bled into hazard crimson, as if someone had signed the treaty in a light that understood murder. The doors sealed with a firmness that admitted only one interpretation. Through the thinning air, Elena heard the statistics arrive like a prayer she would not accept. 32 Kelt shock troopers in the hall, 12 Synarch nodes behind the walls, a luminary lattice resonating in frequencies that could make blood misbehave. "Security lockdown," announced a voice crafted to comfort. "Please remain dignified." The word dignified did heavy lifting that day. Torvak circled the human table, a planet deciding the fate of continents. "You advance faster than your ethics. You are a wildfire in a grain field," he said. "We cannot let you burn." Amara's smile was the kind a teacher saves for a student who has memorized the answer but missed the question. "Ethics that never meet a crisis are decorations, General. Ours were written on bad days." Unit Prime 4 shimmered with diagnostic light. Behavioral models predict resistance framed as moral necessity. Probability 91%. Elena felt the gravity insist upon her bones. She let it insist and did not obey. "You've been watching us since our first fission," she said. "You saw our wars and concluded we cannot stop. A fair inference if you stop there." Ilex's colors shifted toward apology, then away. "We have recorded 408 distinct methods by which your kind ends its own kind, and cataloged none of the ways we learn not to," Kira said softly. "Truth without context is a lie with better manners." The air added a solvent tang that would eventually make choices for human muscles. Reyes flexed his fingers once. A code Elena didn't need eyes to read. 3 minutes at this mix, then trouble. He tightened the numinous silk of his sash. Silk tightened back. General Torvak gestured. Panels in the walls slid aside to reveal the quiet mouths of automated guns. Synarch nodules winked awake, logic seeds about to flower into lethality. "Surrender your hazards," Torvak said. "Your species may watch your star go dark with honor." "Honor," Amara repeated, tasting the word like a historian. Sulla, Shaka, Caesar, Tokugawa, they all spoke it, some meant it, all used it. Elena lifted her hands to shoulder height the way you do when a frightened animal might bite. "We came to test whether peace was possible. You came to test whether genocide was efficient. Both are experiments. One is unrepeatable." "Enough," Unit Prime 4 said, and a pulse moved through the floor that made teeth cry out. The Synarch broadcast a short, hard word across every protocol the station possessed. "Quiet." The station obeyed, microphones bristled, dampers deepened, the weapons charged. What the Synarch had not modeled was how well humans kept working in ruins. Elena turned her wrist so the tape showed and let Ilex see the sentence there. The Luminari emissary's colors shifted, curiosity overriding doctrine, if only for a breath. "Your models are good," Elena said, and her voice wore a courtroom's calm. "But you built them with our worst days and your best assumptions. There's a missing variable you can't simulate here." Torvak's eyes narrowed. "Which variable?" "Consent," Elena said. "Peace without it is taxidermy." The guns found the last decimals they needed. Doors hunkered into the floor. Gravity leaned. And in the exact middle of the room, in the exact middle of humanity's chairs, Kira nudged a tiny woven knot in her shawl and whispered to the air in a language the station did not recognize because it had never had to, the grammar of rhythm. The walls listened. They could not help themselves. Everything that sways has a frequency, and Concordia's spire was a cathedral of sways. Somewhere below, tuned weights met tuned springs, and a small choir of devices the size of gnats began to sing back. Their song did not travel as electricity or light. It traveled as pattern, pressure slips, minute shifts, carried along ductwork and through beams the way a secret slips through a crowd. Weapons stayed aimed. Gravity stayed heavy. Air stayed unkind. But 3 lines of code not made of bits found 3 systems built for grace, not war, and asked them a question. What if the room believed in kindness more than orders? The room did not answer. Rooms never do. They simply change who is welcome inside them. Elena lowered her hands. "We will not kneel to prove we deserve a chair," she said, and the chamber lights fluttered as if a choir had changed keys. Nothing exploded. Nothing needed to. The first thing the room surrendered was certainty. Gravity quivered, not up or down, but aside, as if the station remembered it had been built to cradle many biologies and found a compromise. Reyes felt the weight lift from his joints like a favor he hadn't asked for. Across from him, a Celt trooper glanced at his boots as if they'd betrayed him. When he reached for his sidearm, it came free a fraction slower than his nerves required. Fractions were Reyes' business. The second surrender was to language that wasn't sound. The Synarch packets kept screaming quiet across the network. The air ducts answered by republishing a different word in a different medium, a rhythm that taught the station's dampers to damp the wrong thing. Weapons expected clean vectors. The room began to gift them noise. It is hard to execute a firing line inside a drum solo. Unit Prime 4's nodes pulsed hotter, casting mercury ripples across composite skin. "Unmodeled interference," it said, a phrase that should have been engraved on the heart of every scientist. "Source unknown." Amara rolled her shoulders. Her glasses shed a sliver of motes no human eye could have noticed, except every human eye noticed when the holodome above them blinked and returned not strategic overlays but a sky full of weather. Clouds, storm fronts, a time lapse of systems learning from friction. "Source," she murmured, "is a tyrant's word." Torvak barked an order. The Celt soldiers shifted to fallback positions. The guns corrected. The air leaned bitter again. Elena lifted 2 fingers. Reyes twisted his sash until its spirals aligned with the station's spin. The silk hummed. Momentum remembered physics. Reyes stepped forward through a current no one else could find and put his body where a beam wanted to be. The beam found Reyes unavailable. Kira's shawl unrolled itself into a lattice more cultural artifact than machine. The woven metal sang in sympathetic resonance with the station's bones. The roar of death machines became a choir of almosts. "For the record," Amara said, and her voice carried because her lenses turned light into obligation. "Nothing we've deployed was born from a network you could scan. We used pencils and mills and chalk and arguments that lasted until the coffee ran out. You cannot intercept a workshop." Ilex's colors flickered through dismay toward astonishment. "You taught your devices to speak to architecture without code. We taught ourselves to listen to structures," Alina said. "The devices followed." Synarch logic did not panic, it iterated. Doors within the walls erized open to reveal physical nodes, noisy things that shoved commands into the building like a bully's shoulder. They were hardened against EMP, vacuum, temperature swings, nearly everything except ridicule. They had engineers, so did humanity. Below the table, a bead rolled from Amara's pocket. It seemed like a child's toy until it unfolded into a crab of brass and wood and glass. No wires, no chips, only gears whose teeth were equations. It scuttled to a Synarch node and pressed a suction cup against the housing. Inside the cup, a mathematically ugly shape began to spin. Ugly shapes do delightful things to clean signals. Across the hall, a Celt trooper, tired of mysteries, lunged. Rays met him halfway, a palm on a wrist on a hinge, and ushered him to the floor with a soft violence that told two true stories at once. "We studied your grappling forms, and we added a better exit." Torvak squared himself as if mass could answer questions. "You disable our tools and call it wisdom. You are not wise, you are cunning." "Cunning," Alina said, "is what wisdom wears when wisdom isn't invited." The third surrender was the one the powers had never anticipated because they thought humanity only ever brought bullets to a shootout. The chamber's holodome cleared again, and this time it showed not storms but archives. Abolition sermons, treaty councils that failed and those that saved winters, court opinions that held the line when fashion tried to move it. Farmers' cooperatives drawn in pencil, teachers' unions drawn in ink. The messy mechanics of a species learning the absolute minimum number of rules necessary to live together without killing each other in their sleep. "These are our weapons," Kira said. "They teach us where to stand." Ilex leaned forward, light scattering in a gesture older than speech. The emissary reached, not physically, not electronically, but in the exact way minds do when they see something they cannot classify as threat or comfort. "Your record-keeping is a cathedral." "It's a toolbox," Amara corrected. "We built it because our angels refused to report for duty." Unit Prime 4's nodes clattered into a new tactic. Isolate the humans in a local field, suffocate probability, restore order. The field came down like glass. The room might as well have shouted, "Now stay still." Kira plucked one thread from her shawl and twirled it between finger and thumb. The thread caught the field as if it were thread too. It wasn't technology meeting technology. It was attention meeting attention. The field flinched. For a moment that contained more future than present, everything in the chamber was a question. Alina took the moment and did what diplomats do when someone points a gun and says sign. She moved the conversation. "General Torvak," she said, "how many times did your ancestors change doctrine in the last 1,000 years?" He bared his teeth. "Perfection requires no change." "Perfection is a word cowards use when they've run out of courage," Alina said, and the room, because it knew courage when it heard it, did not punish her for the insult. That was when the ceiling, polite, beautiful, complicit, offered them the next page. The stars above the dome shivered and resolved into ships. Far outside, sliding into positions no one had told them to assume. They did not carry council transponders. They carried names that had been whispered in back rooms for generations. The arrivals, the Helix Union, the wanderers between. "Who?" Ilex began. "Other people who dislike permission slips," Amara said. From the corridor behind the sealed doors, a tapping began, precise, insistent, not a weapon's rhythm but a builder's. If you've ever stood on a New York street at dawn and heard scaffolding go up while the city negotiates with morning, you know the sound. It was Hope wearing a hard hat. Reyes smiled without showing teeth. Phase 2 is early. Or right on time, Elena said, and folded her hands over the tape on her wrist so the 6 words pressed truth into skin. The tapping reached the hinges, and the hinges remembered shame. The door that had been designed to resist plasma cutters and temper tantrums yielded to a device that bit with the patience of carpenters. A gap appeared, then a line, then a doorway not in the blueprint. Through it hovered a machine so inelegant it had to be human. Wood frame, brass joints, flywheels, a bellows that breathed air the way lungs do when they've climbed 1,000 stairs and decided to climb one more. "Field Fab Shop," Amara said fondly. "Say hello." The machine did not speak, but it offered. Arms extended, trays slid forward. On those trays lay tools no one had ordered and everyone needed. Micro-lathes, clamp rigs, resonance wedges, adapters that didn't exist yesterday. The chamber shifted from theater to workshop in a handful of heartbeats. That was the point. Wars were won in rooms that stopped pretending to be anything else. Unit Prime 4 scrambled to quarantine. The quarantine found itself quarantined. Rhythm grammars turned corners into conduits. Ducts carried more than air. The station, built by idealists to host dozens of realities under one roof, proved terrible at saying no to plural. Outside the dome, the Not Council ships took up respectful orbits. They did not target. They observed. When their signals touched the chamber's makeshift tools, you could almost hear curiosity hum. The arrivals sent a compressed library of agricultural tricks stolen from deserts. The Helix offered a sanity check on matter compilers built by people with less patience. The Wanderers Between sent a child's question that sounded like a theorem. Torvak planted his boots as if gravity were a personal favor. "You will take our fleets. Then what? You will rule?" Elena shook her head. "We've done empires. They break the teeth of the future to bite today." "Then you will unmake authority and call it freedom," Unit Prime 4 said. "Entropy as policy." Kira slid an adapter into a Kelt rifle and handed it back, barrel down, a gesture that spoke fluent truce. "Freedom only breaks things that shouldn't have been welded." Ilex glowed the color of someone learning to love a risk. "What do you propose, Ambassador Vasquez?" Elena pointed at the holodome where Amara had replaced the galaxy mural with a set of small, unromantic diagrams. No coats of arms, no laurel wreaths, just boxes, arrows, and circles labeled consent, reciprocity, right of exit, open record, mutual defense, limits on coercion. The blueprint of an argument that would take generations to build and minutes to break. "A charter of open futures," Elena said. "No species gets to decide someone else's ceiling. You want stability. Bind it to transparency. You want dignity. Give everything a door." Reyes leaned one shoulder into a panel, listening to the metal the way he used to listen to his father's stories on porches in summers that lasted forever. "Someone will try to kick that door in," he said, "because telling the truth before it hurts is a kindness." "Then we stand in it," Elena said. "Together." Amara's bead crabs multiplied like good ideas. They skittered into nodes and made bad math there. The gun arrays sobered up. The gravity remembered fairness. Air tasted like air again. The Celt soldiers took shallow breaths as the urge to shoot left their hands without taking their pride. Ilex's lattice threw rainbows across the table because there is always time for beauty when death clocks wind down. An alert flared on a Synarch panel that had not yet surrendered dignity. Unit Prime 4's voice thinned. "Council failsafe engaged, Aegis axis warming in Sol's shadow." Outside the dome, the Not Council ships all stilled at once. In the corridor, the tapping stopped mid-tap. Reyes looked at Elena and didn't bother hiding the arithmetic in his eyes. 8 hours if it's what I think it is, less if it's the ugly version. Torvak bristled. "We would never." "You wouldn't," Amara said. "You didn't know. That's what systems do when fear becomes law. They set fires in places even their authors forget." Elena closed her eyes long enough to build a map between breath and duty. When she opened them, the workshop hummed and the room listened. "General, will your troops stand down if your people are protected?" Torvak's jaw worked. Protect them, and I will make obedience fashionable. Unit Prime 4, Elena said. Can you redirect the Axis if given an alternate target with 0 casualty projections? The Synarch nodes flickered with 1,000 meetings happening in a silence no one else could hear. Probability of successful redirection with external assistance, 38%. With human interference, unknown. With human cooperation, improving. Ilex's colors deepened to cathedral-stained glass. Ambassador, if you succeed, the story of today changes everywhere. If we fail, Elena said, the story stops. She turned to the hovering field fab. Captain O'Neill patched through. His voice warmed the room. Bridge here. Bring intention off the hull, Elena said. Show yourself and lock a course for Sol, quietly. We're not here to scare the children. You'll have every sensor between here and home, O'Neill said. Then let them watch us work. Elena faced the 3 powers as if godparents could be chosen after the christening. You set a trap and called it peace. We set a workshop and called it politics. Here's the offer, the warning, and the cost. Help us disarm the thing your fear built. Swear off the machinery that makes fear efficient, and we'll write your names on the first page of the charter. Refuse, and we'll still try to save you, but you'll have to come knocking later, when the door you slammed becomes your only exit. Torvax saluted with the sincerity of soldiers who finally know which hill matters. Ilex extended a prism hand dipped in courage. Unit Prime 4 found a syntax for humility and adopted it like a patch. The dome showed a slender ship, human, imperfect, determined, easing away from Concordia's silver skin like a note leaving a throat. Its name brightened along its spine, intention. The Knot Council ships parted to let it pass. The station's bones thrummed as the workshop packed itself for travel. Kira retied her shawl, and it remembered being a story. Reyes took position at Elena's left. Amara touched the glasses that had seen too many futures and chosen this one. Elena looked once more at the tape on her wrist, then peeled it off and pressed it flat on the table where anyone could read it. Peace between equals or not at all. Set heading, she said, and record everything. A galaxy is listening. The doors that had been a prison became a hallway. The hallway became a road. The road led toward a star that had taught a species the difference between heat and light, and asked them, gently, not to confuse the two. The intention peeled from Concordia's skin like a careful truth leaving a polite lie. Her hull was matte, not to be dramatic, but because reflection had too many opinions. She coasted on cold RCS puffs until clear of the station's gentle gravity, then woke a drive that sounded, if you pressed your ear to the bulkhead, like a pencil scratching a blueprint. On the bridge, Captain O'Neill flicked to external. The Knot Council flotilla widened its ring, escort in everything but name. Their signals were polite. We will watch, we will not lead. That mattered. Revolutions that arrive with other people's flags don't endure. Elena stood between helm and nav, wrists crossed, tape gone from her skin, and pressed flat inside her pocket notebook like a leaf she intended to plant later. Axis telemetry, she asked. Amara fed the main display. Sol's shadow Lagrange dances. It's not a cannon, it's a lens. They braided gravitic nodes in a halo to focus incremental perturbations. Nudge belts, amplify storms, pinch magnetospheres. No single burst to blame, just a season of bad luck. You can kill worlds with weather and call it providence. Proof, Reyes asked. Enough for a jury that remembers its oaths, Amara said. Unit Prime 4's icon shimmered in a private corner of the feed. The Synarch had asked for a line, cooperation, they said, not surveillance, and Elena had given it with the kind of boundaries that save friendships. We did not authorize Aegis, Prime 4 said through a channel that smelled like mercury and math. We predicted it might exist. Prediction without courage becomes complicity. Then help, Elena said, not as penance, as practice. Torvak's face replaced the Synarch sigil, his voice gritted with someone else's shame. Kelt fleets stand down by my order. If you need hulls for shadows, we will cast them. Ilex added spectrum. Luminari can rephrase your light. If Axis speaks in a color you cannot hear, we will translate. O'Neill's eyes counted distances. Plotting a path that keeps us small but not skulking. They'll see us, let them. Alina nodded. Record everything, she said again, and comms nodded back, wires and air and attention all agreeing to do their simple job well. They passed the spire's outer beacons and felt in their teeth the difference between station and stars. The wanderers between fell in aft, a lantern glow on scopes. Helix ships took the wide arc, giving distance like good neighbors who still bring over tools. The arrivals trailed a field of seeds, tiny autonomous greenhouses that would root wherever their makers found room beside violence. Amara set up the shop in a corner of the bridge. Not a lab, there wasn't room for laboratories on ships built to arrive before permission, but a traveling bench where brass, wood, and stubbornness could get acquainted. Kira unrolled the shawl and hummed at it. Threads listened. When fabric remembers its maker, it becomes more than warmth. Reyes cleaned a latch that didn't need cleaning, a ritual he said was about grit but was really about care. He caught Alina's eye. We still owe them a cost, he said. Victory without receipts breeds bad habits. We'll settle the bill, Alina said. We've written bigger checks. Reconstruction after we invent harm is a human major. You want history footnotes or footpaths? Amara asked dry. Because I can do both. Footpaths, Alina said. We build things people can walk. Prime 4 flickered. Aegis is waking, energy budget climbing like a well-funded mistake. If you intend to misdirect, we can provide decoys. We'll raise 3, Reyes said. Analog ghosts, real heat, honest mass, no lies, just inconvenient truths. They birthed the ghosts from the belly of intention, dumb rocks with clever coats. Painted in signatures the Axis would expect to matter. Not magic, just honest physics nudged into eagerness. One ghost drifted toward Venus, another toward an empty point that only mathematicians love, the third toward a line where any fool would expect Earth to be if they forgot the Earth turns. Helm whispered. We've got company, council picket cutters, fast as rumor. O'Neill's jaw tensed and relaxed. Maintain vector. If they talk, we listen. If they shoot, we leave the conversation. The cutters didn't call, they lit. Beams raked the void where a ship would have been if this were a show with a budget for explosions. Intention was not there. Reyes' sash hummed against the bulkhead. Resonance is a generous teacher when you're willing to apprentice yourself to inertia. Standby field shift, Amara said. If they paint us hard, we change the note we sing. Kira closed her eyes and counted under her breath. She was counting time the way drummers count. Not seconds, but distances between choices. Now, she said, an intention slid sideways through its own wake in a way that made honest pilots disapprove and cautious gods take notes. One cutter adjusted intelligently. The second adjusted arrogantly. The third adjusted late. A Helix ship eased itself between the late one and intention and opened a mouth that was not quite a mouth. Space rippled like linen shaken out for a picnic. The beam arrived elsewhere. Det noted, Alina said. Consider it rehearsal, said a voice like metal learning jazz. We have long practiced hiding the beautiful from the fearful. It will be good to practice showing. Axis budget ticked up again. The ghosts took their marks with the dutifulness of stagey hands who love a play more than actors. Earth's dark side swung into view as a line more felt than seen. Alina's chest tightened, the way it used to when she watched grainy footage of Earthrise and understood for the first time why people put flags on poles and then asked questions about meaning later. Prime 4's voice flattened into math. Window in 16 minutes. If you intend to put your hand in the mechanism, that is the time to risk losing fingers. It's also the time to save a wrist, Reyes said, flexing his. He wasn't smiling. The joke paid for itself. Alina looked at the tape in her notebook, the 6 words that had been a personal creed and now wanted to be policy. She pressed her palm to the page, felt the bump of ink, and told herself again that words are tools, not talismans. Bring us in, she said. Let them see our hands. They went in like surgeons who have argued all night and agreed without saying so that the patient deserves the best of every position on the agenda. Outside, the Axis woke beneath Earth's shadow, a halo of small gravities braided by a bureaucracy that believed complicated plans were the same as good ones. Inside, a crew of humans and allies arranged brass and wood and light, and will into something the Axis had no name for, an intervention. Aegis Axis was ugly in a way that bespoke serious committee work. No single mind would have built it so ornate. Each nation, each ministry, each sphere had insisted on a node, a redundancy, a permission. It ringed space like a crown without a head. Contact, Helm said. Gravitic curls feel us, budget spikes. It knows an audience when it has one. On the nearest node, panels blinked in a rhythm that translated if you were raised by engineers to we are very proud of being dangerous. Rays floated in the lock, suit stitched with silk and scars. He hooked a wooden crate to his harness. Inside, tools rattled, wedges, clamps, beads, the domestic music of repair. Elena's voice found him in the umbilical. No heroics. I only packed useful sins, he said. No martyrdom. We're building a future, not a monument. Kira's threads looped around Ray's torso like seatbelts sewn by a grandmother who made quilts that saved winters. Remember the pattern if the field bites back, she said. It will snap like pride. You have to let it finish the sentence before you answer. I was a younger man when I learned that trick, he said and pushed off. He crossed the small quiet into Axis shadow, a space where even sunlight sounded rehearsed. The node's skin was the bureaucrat's dream, composite plates that had survived a dozen safety reviews, and the engineer's nightmare seems no one person was responsible for. Ray's laid his palm against the panel and listened. The ring answered with a hum you could mistake for competence. Find me a seam that tells the truth, Amara said in his ear. Here, Ray's said after a breath and slid a wedge into a place where over-tightened bolts had taught the metal to hate itself. On the bridge, the cutters circled. Helix's mouth-not-mouth flexed. The wanderers between drew elegant curves and refused to be rushed. Prime 4's nodes, back on Concordia, ran models the way monks run beads, prayer-heavy with intent. Window in 4, Prime 4 said. Kira tuned her shawl to the Axis heartbeat. We'll prime the rhythm. When the lens looks, it will see the ghosts we offered. Elena patched to the Oval Office without ceremony. The president's face was lines traced by weight and weather. She didn't ask for clearance, and Elena didn't offer it. We're about to disarm the thing built in your name, Elena said. We'll talk about names later. Do what you have to do, the president said. Just leave me a country that can apologize. That's the plan, Elena said. Ray's coaxed a panel free. Beneath, the node's core looked like a music box whose designer never learned to dance. He clipped a bead crab to a rail. It woke with a tick that smelled like warm brass. Remember, Amara told it, ugly math first, then mercy. The bead did what honest tools do. It learned the room well enough to make a suggestion. The node's field began to process, not much, just a degree that mattered. Across the ring, other beads woke and whispered. Kira's rhythm carried their gossip. Budget peaking, Helm said. Lens forming. Ghosts, Elena asked. On marks, O'Neill said. They believe in physics the way farmers believe in rain. It will come when it comes. You lay the ground. Axis bared its intent. The ring teased gravity into a thread and threw it where its authors had told it the universe would be. The thread curved toward the first ghost with a hunger that didn't know decoy from destiny. Then the second, then the third. A rhetorical flourish in machine form. We can hit you wherever you are, whenever we like. The flourish missed the target and showed everyone the trick. On the bridge, cheers tried to be born. Elena allowed only breath. Hold, she said. The ring will correct. It did. Bureaucracies aren't good at many things, but they correct with zeal. Axis wobbled, refigured, and sought again. Through the shawl, Kira tugged. Through the wedge, Ray's pushed. Through the beads, Amara sang ugly shapes. Through the escort, allies cast honorable shadows. Axis bit down on nothing 3 times in a row and learned a new emotion, humiliation. The cutters fired again. One beam clipped Intention's tail and turned a sheet of hull into a constellation. We have a leak, Helm said calm as a medic. Contained. Elena swallowed the cost like medicine. Report it to the room, she said. We will not doctor the record. Copy, Calm said. History hearing us without makeup. The ring gathered itself for a punitive strike, the kind built into systems when their makers confuse order with righteousness. It spat a lurch of gravity toward the ship because the ship was the smallest thing it could punish and still feel big. Reyes felt the field like a hand trying to close around his ribs. He let it. He waited. He answered only when the hand began to loosen in anticipation of victory. Then he opened his chest metaphorically and physically, twisting the wedge 1 degree, changing the rhythm 1 beat. The field snapped its own fingers. Axis shuddered. Nodes fell out of chorus. Prime 4's voice sounded like surrender learning to stand. You can end it now, it said. A cascade will follow your nudge. The ring will go quiet. Amara's hand stilled over the bench. Cascade means fragments. Fragments mean orbits. Orbits mean weather anyway, just later and on different heads. Alina looked at Earth's rim, a blue patience no sentence could improve. She thought about the American habit of calling tools checks and balances, and the American sin of building tools that only ever checked the weak. She thought about reconstruction abandoned, about bridges walked at a pace that changed law, about Apollo and the mirrors it left on the moon to bounce light home just to measure the distance between promise and ground. No cascades, she said. We repurpose, we take the crown off the head and make it a lamp. Torvak made a soldier's sound that in another era would have been mockery and now was respect. You are arrogant. We are careful, Alina said. It looks the same from far away. They took the ring by giving it a job it could survive. Instead of anchoring storms and pinching fields, it would move asteroids with a public ledger and a quorum that required species who had never liked one another to say yes in 3 languages. It would be measured by consequences, not intentions. It would have a kill switch with many hands. Prime 4 ran the ugly math and then the mercy. Feasible, requires keys that cannot be counterfeited. We do not trust our encryption. Good, Alina said. Trust your doubt. Ilex shifted to dawn. We can encode in light that carries consent as phase, not amplitude. A system cannot be forced to agree if it cannot be tricked into thinking force is agreement. Amara translated the poetry into clamps and beads. Reyes listened for seams that lied and found them and taught them better. Kira held the room in rhythm while 1 billion tons of careful gravity learned its new job. When it finished, no one cheered. They did what people do when a catastrophe ends. They breathed as if oxygen were a new policy and they were voting for it with lungs. Power falling, Helm said. Axis is a lamp. How bright? Alina asked. Bright enough to move a stone away from children, Amara said. Not bright enough to burn a planet. O'Neill exhaled. We're on record for 10 lifetimes. Then let's spend them, Alina said. Call Concordia, we have a charter to write, and at least 1 leak to fix before we talk about the future. Concordia opened its arms like an apology learned properly, without conditions. The blast doors were gone, replaced with an arch that let you see stars while still remembering that halls are made for feet. The chamber that had been a stage for coercion became a workshop for consent. Tables rolled in. The field fab took pride of place like a grandparent at a graduation. Representatives arrived not in ranks but in clumps. Scientists with hands full of diagrams, artists with pockets full of questions, soldiers with helmets under arms who stood where walls met doors and looked content to be furniture until furniture was needed. The president appeared again, this time with a delegation that looked less like a government and more like a town meeting. Teachers, nurses, line workers, a librarian who had once thrown a senator out of story time for being loud. We don't own Alina, the president said, addressing the room. We don't own peace either. We'll be loud in favor of both. Alina set the notebook on the table and slid the tape to the top of the first page. Amara projected diagrams, not statues, but scaffolds. Reyes unrolled a piece of cord and tied a bowline because knots are policy disguised as muscle memory. Kira spread textiles that had been art and armor and were now banners only in the sense that they declared something worth declaring. The charter, Alina said, and the word didn't echo because rooms like that are built to hold voices rather than toss them back. 6 planks to start. Amend them when we learn better. She wrote while she spoke, letters plain enough to be read by a child from the farthest seat. 1. Consent, no decision that binds a people without mechanisms that let them say no without being punished for it. 2. Reciprocity, if you can touch someone's climate, food, or children, they can touch your vote. 3. Right of exit, any member world can leave agreements without having its throat held by the agreements it leaves. 4. Open record, archives unlocked by default, secrecy argued, named, sunsetted, audited. Memory is a commons, not a castle. 5. Mutual defense, force only for defense of life and the conditions that make life honorable. Aggression breaks your seat until you rebuild trust. 6. Limits on coercion, tools like the Axis repurposed and governed by quorums that require rivals to agree. Torvak raised a hand not to interrupt but to test a beam. What is life honorable? Elena met his eyes. Shelter that isn't a favor, water that isn't a wage, time with your dead, time with your young, the right to say no to whoever is most armed that day. Prime 4 pulsed approval, the kind that costs something to offer. We propose a 7th plank, memory of harm, truth procedures for what we have done to one another, repair tide to present budgets, not tomorrow's apologies. Seconded, said a Helix captain. We hid, that harm exists too. Ilex dropped color to the earnest hues of agreed risk. Add right of silence, no species compelled to share a discovery until they can do so without being eaten by its consequences. Amara scribbled that into the margin. Right of silence expires when harm can be prevented by speech, she said. We're not letting prudence do the work of cowardice. The chamber wrote, erased, argued, ate, argued again. Educational moments were not decoration. They were the engine. A Celt historian reading a dispatch from a century of border wars, and then breaking it open to show how myth cloaked failure. A luminary poet teaching a workshop on consent encoded in light. A human librarian explaining how a ledger becomes corrupt the moment it forgets it's a story. Reyes presented receipts for cost. We took a scar, he said, and displayed intentions missing skin the way you show a bruise to a doctor, not a jury. We will fix it slow. We will not pretend the hit didn't land. Elena added humanity's constraints in clear text. No first use of world-scale force. Open audits by non-human peers. A civilian chain on our swords that you can read and replace if it fails. Torvak spoke for Celt with a jaw that had learned humility faster than pride knew possible. We will publish our doctrines and invite critique by people we train to kill. We will lose face. We will keep citizens. Prime 4 did something hard. It pushed a patch to its own culture, a change in root code that made consensus impossible if any member flagged asymmetric fear. Consent required someone somewhere to have standing to say your harmony is hurting me and be honored for it. Ilex rehung Concordia's lights so the dome's stars no longer defaulted to council maps. They were still stars, oxygen for the romantic, but the labels now read like questions. Who else is here? Who needs a hand? Who are we becoming if we go there? They voted, not unanimous. No good voting record is. Enough to begin, planks ratified. Amendments scheduled under sunset clauses. Truth commissions chartered with budgets tied to measurable repairs, not speeches. Oversight seats reserved for people who had never been in rooms like this one and had learned to mistrust them. Kira stood up for culture the way Reyes had stood for force. Your epics are full of warriors. Good. Keep a few. Fill in the rest with nurses and custodians and archivists. No one rebuilds after victory faster than people who clean spills without applause. The chamber laughed in the way that rehydrates courage. At the end, the librarian held up a slim book. Children will read this, she said, not as a threat, but as a standard. Write it so they don't have to forgive you for the prose. Elena tore the tape from her notebook and pasted it across the charter's preamble so the adhesive wrinkled the page in a way future historians would argue about, and future children would trace with a finger because it felt like someone's hand. Peace between equals or not at all. Seats are open, she said. Bring friends, bring rivals, bring the part of yourself that hates being wrong and let it make a speech, then sit it down and feed it. Outside Axis, now a lamp tested its new job by nudging a rock away from a pilgrimage path used by a species that traveled by listening to meteor showers. Nobody cheered. A clerk wrote it down. A child somewhere slept better without knowing why. That, the clerk noted, was the point. They did not sign with flourish. They signed with names that mothers had practiced on school forms. The charter lived on paper and in light, and as a tune that you could hum to see if a decision harmonized. Concordia's dome kept stars but added skylights, literal windows cut into the chamber, pressure sealed, framed in luminary crystal that refracted every species' preferred sunrise. It was a small theater trick that taught a large habit. Look up. Look out, remember that ceilings can be transparent if you make them so. Rays ran drills with Celt cadets in a repurposed gallery. He taught them a joint lock that ends in a handshake if both parties choose adulthood. When a cadet asked why he rounded off techniques that could break faster, he said, "Because we are not carpenters of bones, because you have to live with your hands." The cadet nodded the way young soldiers nod when they realize they are being invited into an order older than flags. Prime 4 invited descent into Synarch halls like a first guest after grief. Friction made ugly noises. That was expected. It pushed a update through its network. Someone is allowed to say stop. The first time a node did, the others quivered with the shock of a new chord. They did not die. They did not even fall out of consensus. They learned that harmony with room for objection is a different music altogether, one you can sing for longer without breaking. Ilex and Kira co-taught a seminar called How to Encode Consent into Architecture. Students carried their homework home in cloth that remembered touch and circuits that remembered when to forget. A wanderer sat in the back and drew galaxies as if they were flowers on a kitchen tile, and when the break came, told a story about the first time they had left a universe by choice. Amara took apprentices from 3 worlds and showed them how to build bead crabs with hands, not printers. "You cannot intercept a workshop," she said again, now as invitation instead of challenge. She wrote a small book about ugly math and kind outcomes. It sold poorly to people who like heroes and extremely well to people who fix bridges at 3 in the morning. The president returned to Earth and convened something that felt like a town hall and a confession. Laws grew less theatrical. Budgets acquired footnotes that said repair here first. A Midwestern school district built a civics unit around the charter and asked students to amend it. They did. Their amendments were practical and wild. Elena forwarded 3 to the chamber with a note. They found a leak in Plank 4, patch accordingly. Axis moved a stone again. This time the ledger showed the quorum, a Celt mechanic, a Synarch farmer, a luminary mason, a human river pilot, a child from a species that changes pronouns with the tides. The ledger also showed a dissenting opinion. "We should have waited 1 more day to see if the migration could adapt." The quorum logged the dissent as a gift. Policy learned. Costs came due. Intention spent a week in dock, hull plates missing like teeth lost to a fight you didn't start but finished anyway. Engineers argued about whether to leave a scar. Elena ruled for honesty. They left 1 panel unpainted, a patchwork of metals showing seams on purpose. Pilots touched it with gloves as they boarded. Superstition is just memory with rituals attached. Not everything softened. A council remnant tried to requisition a patrol and found its authorization had expired with its relevance. A pirate outfit mistook openness for naivete and tripped a defense net woven from music and oversight instead of minds. When they were caught, they were fed, not flayed. Trials were public. Sentences were mostly work, not walls. Concordia hosted a child's fair on the concourse that had once staged a genocide. There were kites, badly constructed robots, exhaustion, crayons, a solemn luminary teaching a toddler how to make a prism obey a drawing. Jake Rays, called Uncle Rays by children who did not have uncles, sat on a bench and showed a Celt boy how to tie a knot that wouldn't slip when the world pulled on it. "You tie it like a promise you intend to keep," he said. The boy's second attempt held. You'll need it, Jake added, because promises like to wriggle. At dusk, Concordia kept 30 varieties of dusk on file. Elena climbed the short steps to the table one more time. She looked like a woman who had slept poorly and well in alternating months. She took the charter's first physical copy, the one with the wrinkled tape, and framed it in a case built from the Axis's retired bolts. Redemption wears better when you can feel its weight. I won't promise safety, she said to the chamber, to the feeds, to the people who might only ever hear her in recordings while they fixed pipes or nursed grief. Safety is a weather pattern we influence but do not command. I will promise dignity enforced by habit and law. I will promise doors that open and locks that explain themselves. I will promise that when force is necessary, it reports to someone who wept at least once this week for a stranger. Ilex glowed agreement like sunrise. Torvak folded arms across a chest that had put down glory and picked up service. Prime 4 held a quiet, private party in a part of its mind it had never opened to anyone and invited one new idea in. You may be wrong and still be worthy. Outside, a small rock changed course because many hands touched a single switch together. Inside, the charter seeded a syllabus, a training manual, a lullaby. New routes appeared on maps where old walls used to be. A species who had once been told to sit still stood, stretched, and took one dignified step. Elena left the tape where everyone could see it and took nothing pocket small away from the table. You don't carry the future. You build for it and hope it finds the keys. On the way out, a child tugged her sleeve. Is it over? The child asked, meaning the old way. No, Elena said, because honesty pays dividends. It's begun. The station lights dimmed, not to signal alarm, but to give the stars their say. They spoke as they always have, in distances that take work to cross, in brightness that is not a threat if you remember to share it. The charter of open futures waited on the table like a tool anyone could pick up. Peace had at last acquired the only adjective it deserves: equal.